Okay, good morning, everyone. This is the Program Review Process Advisory Council meeting. It is September 15th at about 9:03 a.m. I have hit the record button. The purpose of the recording is for our meeting minutes for our bylaws. For those of you who can, Dr. Williams, I see that you are driving, so we'll just count you verbally as in attendance. But for those of you who can, please put your name and your title in the chat, and that will record your attendance at today's meeting. Secretary Rye, do you have any opening remarks you'd like to share before we dive into our content?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our meeting today. We all so appreciate your guidance and suggestions as we implement House Bill 1244, but broadly, not just the House Bill, broadly how we talk about not only a program approval process, but also program development. I think that's an important aspect, a very proactive work, making sure that our institutions are thriving, and also we are addressing the needs of our state, whether it's workforce or otherwise. So thank you, and look forward to a very productive next 1 hour. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Secretary. I'm going to dive right in and do a quick overview of the topic for today's discussion. Before I start sharing slides, I want to emphasize today is a discussion. It's an open opportunity to talk about what is harm and the standards, when we should use it, when we should understand it. So I want to go through some slides, give you all some background information. Note that this is discussion. No decisions are being made today. We'll come back to this topic at the October meeting. And use what comes from this discussion as basis for some potential regulations and some standards. So let me give you a bit of background. Some of you may be already familiar with this, so bear with me as I review it so that we're all on the same page. Our discussion today is a direct result of recent legislation through House Bill 1244, as Secretary Rye just noted. The bill's purpose is to reform and enhance the academic program review process, and what we're about to discuss today directly impacts those regulatory changes that we're about to make. Okay, from old to new statutory language. What you see up on the screen is the old statutory language that outlines the reasons for an objection to a proposed program. So let me walk you through that. One is inconsistency of the proposed program with the institution's mission. The second, not meeting a regional or statewide need consistent with the Maryland State Plan. Third, unreasonable program duplication, which would cause demonstrable harm to another institution. And fourth, violation of the state's equal education opportunity obligations under state and federal law. I'll stop there. I do see a hand raised. I believe it's Dr. Williams. No hand raised. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, this is the old statutory language. I'm going to give you the track changes of the new statutory language so you can see what House Bill 1244 changed. First, no changes to inconsistency with a institution's mission. A minor change, clerical, change around not meeting a statewide need. They just revised the language to be consistent around calling the state plan for higher education. The last two changes are the big changes that I particularly want you to highlight. The legislation changes unreasonable program duplication so that it's no longer harm to an institution, but instead harm to the state or students attending institutions of higher education in the state. So it is unreasonable program duplication, which would cause harm to the state or students attending institutions of higher education in the state. The second big change is clarifying that unnecessary duplication is in violation of the state's equal educational opportunity obligations under state and federal law. So let me show you the clean version. So again, inconsistency with the institution's mission, not meeting a regional or statewide need, unreasonable program duplication, which would cause harm to the state or student, and unnecessary duplication in violation of the state's equal educational opportunities. This is a significant shift because it is shifting harm away from harm to an institution to harm to the state or student. One quick note, Dr. Phillips, I see your hands raised. Hold that thought for a quick second. House Bill 1244 also tells us that it is the General Assembly's expectation that when we think about unreasonable duplication, that harm to the state or student, that we identify 3 priorities in that. First, meeting state and regional workforce needs. Second, preserving existing programs that are able to meet state and regional workforce needs, and that's to be done in conjunction with the state plan. And third, that the commission must prioritize collaboration. So the legislation explicitly prioritizes these 3 things as we think about what is unreasonable duplication. Dr. Phillips, you had your hand raised.
This is helpful, though. I should have just waited till the next slide. I was looking for an example of what would be a case of a program that would fit that new definition as it moved forward. I know this is not something that we deal with very often, but it might be helpful to have a clarifying example of what that would look like. But this
Sure.
kind of walks us a little bit through that.
Yep. So let me just take you to our last slide, which is really what we need to talk about today. What is harm? When does harm happen? So unreasonable program duplication, which would cause harm to the state or student. So we have some potential examples, and these are examples that we've seen in past objections to proposed programs. One is inefficient or inappropriate use of state resources. That could be considered harm to the state. Interference with the state statutory responsibilities regarding our HBCUs. And potential, and this is a harm to students, potential unavailability of clinical placement sites or other experiential learning opportunities for students. These examples are sourced from historical objections that we have had under the old rules, under demonstrable harm to another institution, but could very well apply to the new standard. So what I'd like to do is open up the discussion. Again, our long-term goal is we, MHEC, need to draft regulations that outline expectations around harm to the state or students. And so we are interested in hearing what you think harm to state or students might mean, so we can incorporate that feedback into proposed regulations. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I can always pull this back up just so that we can all see each other. And let me open this up for discussion. And we could always start, what do you think of those existing examples? Inefficient or inappropriate use of state resources, our statutory responsibilities around HBCUs, and then certainly an ongoing conversation about clinical placement sites and access to clinical placement sites. Dr. Ginsberg.
Well, I'll start it off, as I sometimes like to do during these meetings. Thank you, Emily, for doing this, and thanks to all for being here. I would say 2 things. One is I want to get back to a theme that I talked about last time, that I think unreasonable duplication is certainly an important piece, but one way to understand that is also to think about what reasonable duplication is, because the antithesis, in the more positively stated way, I think would help us to understand what unreasonable duplication is. And I think there are many, many instances where reasonable duplication outweighs the construct of unreasonable duplication. As for the examples, I think it's important to be more precise. Right now, the examples are kind of theoretical. I'd like to understand a little bit more on the ground what they mean, and not just in principle, but in reality. But my first point is the most important one. I think we need to think about what's reasonable and appropriate, which can help us to understand what the antithesis of it is as well.
I appreciate you reiterating that commentary, particularly in today's discussion. Can I ask, I mean, I have thoughts on what reasonable duplication could look like. One example might be there is a demand, there is a workforce need for graduates in a particular field. That's one example that I can imagine. Do you have any specifics of other, like, what could, again, theoretically be a reasonable duplication?
Well, that's a good one. I mean, my criticism in many instances have been that these regulations compel us to prepare the workforce of yesterday, not the workforce of tomorrow. And I think we need to be thinking pragmatically and futuristically, not about the present or the past, and not be burdened by the past, but be anticipatory of the future.
Sure. Thank you. And so I guess that's a question to everyone on the call as well, not just President Ginsburg, on what would be reasonable duplication that would not cause harm to the state or students. Let me move over to Dr. Khan.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. To not just echo what Dr. Ginsburg said, but I think that is really critical. I think we need to figure out what is unreasonable, reasonable. So when, Emily, when you talk about the state, that's harm to the state, I can clearly see the fundings. I can probably see the market oversaturation. But to your point or question about what are examples, so other than what I was thinking about where it might be reasonable is, for example, we talked about the demand, like the demand of the nursing during the COVID era, right? We all know that was there. So there is that when it becomes, that unreasonable becomes reasonable. And I think so. The other thing I'm thinking about is when we talk about the harm to the students, I think every institution has a niche of the student population it serves, every single one of them. They know it well, and they market it that way. So I think I'm in a rural setting that is different from an urban setting. And not just the geographical, I'm even thinking about how the programs are offered. So for those of you who know me, during 2021 COVID, we were back on campus because I teach chemistry, and chemistry, you do it by hands. But again, that's not true for other programs. And that may not be true for other colleges that say, you know what, we may be able to offer chemistry in an online setting. So not geographical students, but again, how the programs are offered could be reasonable within two same similar institutions. For example, one may choose in person, one may choose online. Again, so that drives me back to the student population. And I think there has to be something said about pedagogy as well, right? We all have, as faculty, we all have a niche of how we do and what we do. But I'm thinking from the graduate perspective, if I go back in time, that takes me 25 years back in time, the specializations are also different. No two chemistry programs are the same. They specialize in different arena for a different audience. And that's how when I chose a graduate school, it wasn't about the college, it was about what about the specificity of program that interested me. So I think in a quick essence, simply, Emily, just because you asked me, those are the three things I'm thinking about. But again, I do think we do have to look at workforce, we do have to look at students, and then we have to decide when whatever we do is so not unreasonable for us.
Sure, helpful. I mean, you hit on something that we have historically dealt with, but I think we're now moving back in a different direction, is modality, online versus in person, as an access issue, and being able to serve students. About 8 years ago, we changed the regulations to say modality is a non-substantive change to a program proposal, but we're hearing more and more from campuses that they actually see that as an important distinction, that I'm offering my program online. It is therefore different than a program that is arguably the same than a program being offered in person. So Dr. Khan, did I get that right? Modality could be a consideration.
So that is true, but also offering of a different modality targets, I don't know target. I don't know what the word is. It's too early in the morning. I just came back from a 7:30 class. It is for a specific student audience. So there's, even though it may look unreasonable, the fact that you are catering to a student audience that is different from what another college does. And again, so when we talk about the harm to the students or harm to the institution, so the students are not just about the specialization, it's how we offer, where we offer. For example, in Carroll County, we don't have a public transportation system. So if there's a college that offers it, we have to think about that too as well. So can our students travel as well too? So the urban, the rural, whatever boundaries of the groups we come up with when it comes to student populations.
I think Dr. Khan also talked about differentiations within an academic program. He's talked about his own doctorate in chemistry. So you may have a PhD program in chemistry, but there are differentiations, specialities that makes those programs different. The question is that how do we understand that differentiations and who makes that suggestion, how these two programs are different? All that I think will be important for us. Great points, Dr. Khan. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I want to come back to that differentiation, but let me hop over to President Power.
Thanks so much, Emily. I want to echo both Dr. Ginsburg and Dr. Khan. I think, given the new law, we have an opportunity to really look at this with fresh eyes. And I agree, looking at what's reasonable is super helpful, and probably using examples from the past of what created objections may or may not be the best. That maybe we wind up with many of those in there, but using that as a starting point might be a missed opportunity for this group to sort of take a fresh look at things. I really think in a lot of ways, the other piece that we don't talk about at all that I do think would be reasonable duplication is there student interest? Is there student interest in, to Dr. Khan's point, attending a program at this institution versus that institution, even if it's a similar degree? And even though, we focus so much on workforce, which I appreciate, but sometimes, the centralized command and control of the state determining what educational offerings will be available to students, it has some merits and it has some detractions as well. So I would just encourage us to look at, student demand in addition to workforce demand as we talk about what reasonable duplication might be.
That's helpful, student demand. I also kind of heard, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, so please tell me if I'm misrepresenting what your sentiment is. Student demand also hovers around what I consider institutional identity. Students interested in attending a specific university for lots of different reasons: athletics, Greek life, on-campus housing, all sorts of that complement a particular program or study of interest for a student. So that institutional identity can play a role in student interest for a particular program. Okay, I see your head nod. Great. President Yam.
Thanks, Emily. Just a comment on the clinical sites. And you mentioned that going through the objections, this is one of the common ones. I've faced that a few times in my tenure here at Notre Dame. And I think that one thing I would recommend we think about is we as far as I know, and I had this in with one of the objections to I believe it was either the OT program or the MSN and nurse practitioner. I can't remember which one it was. We have students from other states that are taking a portion of it, the clinical, which is done in Maryland. They're not our in-state students. They're not at one of our institutions. They're at an out-of-state institution, but they're doing the clinical there. And I was able, so a CEO that I reached out to ask if they would provide clinical sites for us mentioned that yes, we have room for the students, and also we're taking students right now from whatever state they were doing, whatever college that state was in. So there are a lot of variables here that I think we need to think about. Oftentimes, statistics are quoted in the objection that there's not enough clinical sites. That's why schools put limits on the number of students they take in some of the healthcare programs. But That data is national, which includes many rural populations and places and geographies there where it is hard. It is hard in those geographies. That's not the case in Maryland. Maryland's rich in healthcare resources. And with some of these clinical specialties, there's almost a 24/7, 7-day-a-week opportunity for them, especially at the advanced practice level. So I get a little concerned with this, but if the expectation is that the school would be able to demonstrate and show that this is not going to be a problem and harmful, that would be sufficient to get it approved, or to at least have the objection withdrawn.
Right. Yeah, we've and certainly appreciate your specific examples, and it comes up several times, particularly in the health field, when we talk about expansion of clinical sites. And that's given as an example of harm to students, that a student could potentially be delayed in completing their program of study because there's not an available clinical placement site as required by a licensing board to meet licensing standards for supervised vision, supervised experience. So it's a good point. So I hear that should be a consideration when we think about harm, and specifically harm to students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, President Jaskin.
Yeah, actually, echoing what Mary Lou was just addressing, I wanted to weigh on that topic of unavailability of clinical placements as a metric for unreasonable duplication. I think it's really important that we're clear about how that's going to be assessed. There's sort of two obvious ways that gets assessed, right? It's either the site placements assessment of their own capacity to bring on additional placements, or institutions who have placements at those sites through existing programs assessment. And I just would really encourage us to trust our site placements to affirm their capacity to support our programs. Oftentimes there are discussions happening about how those new placements will be addressed, and it relying on other institutions to indicate capacity for placements doesn't make a lot of sense when the hospitals or sites themselves ought to be really the experts on what they can handle.
Right. Thank you for that. We have, I can think of a couple of instances where we have literally said, school A, school B, send us your actual placement sites. And we did a cross-reference to see where there was overlap, and have had conversations with some of those sites to say, you're being represented as being able to expand. Is this true? Can you tell us more about that? So having our staff do a little bit more research and analysis on site placements has been helpful in determining, is there significant overlap? Will there be a saturation in placement opportunities?
Well, and I might suggest that some burden would be able to be taken off of your staff if letters were just submitted indicating that availability, rather than you needing to sort of wade into calling up different hospitals and other organizations. So just a suggestion there.
Helpful. We appreciate that. Thank you. Anything to make the light to make the load a little lighter. Thank you. Dr. Ganji.
There we go. So just to follow up on what Julia said, it would be helpful to hear where you think the evidence, and burden lies, right? I think our assumption is programs that are submitted have rationale, for going forward, and any institution filing an objection, the burden is on them, right? To show aspects of why, they really aren't meeting this. we could go and get contracts with all clinical placements, ahead of time. That is a lot of work, right? Your staff could go and investigate and do this, but I'm wondering whether that's twisting the expectations, that are associated with a objection, as opposed to just the usual information that we submit when we put in these new programs.
Right. And I think that's exactly why we want to have this conversation, is how much. So we'll need to do regulation. We'll need to adopt some procedures around this, and then certainly some guidance around what we would expect to be included in an objection. And so where should we set some expectations of how much evidence should be provided in an objection, so that we can do the analysis to determine unreasonableness and harm.
Yeah, I'll just put out, I personally think objections should be very few and far between, right? It should be very high standard. I don't think, certainly in the time I've been in the provost's office and beforehand, I don't think Johns Hopkins has ever objected, to a particular program. And there would have to be an enormously high bar for us to do so.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Other thoughts about what is harm to the state or student? Chancellor, please.
Good morning, everybody. Let me raise another perspective other than the ones that have been very appropriately talked about. And I raised my hand, Emily, because you just said harm to the state. And what I'm going to say, colleagues, is based on conversations, not on data. But I think it's a perspective that we need to recognize. As I'm sure many of you do, I have the opportunity to sit with the business community, and particularly the business community that considers bringing their business, bringing their company to Maryland. I don't need to remind anybody that perhaps our biggest challenge as a state right now is, in fact, growing economic development. The secretary sits with me, and I sit with him in a number of conversations that focus on growing economic development. And I would say anecdotally, everybody, that the word is out, and not in a good way, that we have this process here in Maryland that at times, at least to them, flies in the face of economic development. If they consider bringing their organization to Maryland, they do worry about workforce, and they do ask local institutions, and by local I mean institutions that are geographically proximate to where they are considering building their organization. And as a result, they see our occasional disagreements with each other around program duplication. I would submit to you that that is consistent with the language harm to the state, particularly in our current environment where we all need a hand and will need an increasing hand from the state. So it's in our best interests to do the third thing in that list and figure these things out together, because otherwise we're cutting off our nose.
Thank you, Chancellor. So if I can try to feed back what you said there. There are times where an industry partner, a potential employer that could be setting up shop here in Maryland, is hesitant to do that because there are concerns about institutions' ability to quickly and easily put together a program to meet that industry need, because of our duplication analysis and objection process, and that there is potential that a program could be denied based on unreasonable duplication, and that if we prioritize harm, not prioritize, but if we emphasize harm to the state, that would be harm to the state to say, no, 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 you don't get to have this program because it is duplicative. We would instead say, no, it's harm to the state if we don't have the program. And I think maybe that speaks back to President Ginsburg's comments about when it might be reasonable to have a duplicative program. And it kind of loops back to a workforce needs analysis, larger industry, economic, strategic planning.
That might actually be seen as duplication, but is justified by the higher needs of the state, which in turn impact the vitality of higher education. You know, anecdotally, again, to be honest with all of you, what some of the folks I refer to have said to me is, Perman, what about that commission you have? Aren't they obstructive? This is not my language, just saying.
Well, and I think we have some leeway. I think the General Assembly has given us some new language to work with. I mean, I think that's some of the challenge is the language within the statute. We have some new language around harm to the state, and so I appreciate the comment, Chancellor, that is potential harm to the state, is an inability for economic growth.
Thank you.
Thank you. President Ginsburg.
Yeah, let me pick up on that for a second. Really, Chancellor, thanks for that comment. That was very, very helpful. And Emily, when I talk about, and I've talked about now at a couple of meetings, what reasonable duplication is, it also speaks to the nuance of how one defines duplication. Because duplication, in my experience, to be perfectly candid with the Commission, has been defined in sometimes very elaborate, gross ways, and sometimes in very, very specific and narrow ways. And so I think diving for you and your team to dive into not just what it is, but how it's defined and how it's assessed could be very helpful, because I find there's a lot of ambiguity, and frankly, this concept of duplication has been used both as a sword and a shield for institutions, and not as a sword and a shield for the state. And that's really to the Chancellor's point. And I think we need to be very precise about that. So thank you, Jay. Very, very insightful comment.
Helpful feedback. And again, many thanks to the legislature for changing that language, because the language previously was harm to an institution. Now we focus the harm on state or students. So I think that is helpful new language. Dr. Phillips.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I think you just have a really hard, almost impossible job here when you start talking about duplication, program analysis. The example that always comes to my mind is from a book I read about petroleum engineers being basically employed as waitresses and hostesses at restaurants. And then fracking occurred, and then they were the highest paid employees in the nation, right? And just when you look at the data to prove these points, to show that this is not an unreasonable duplication, the data you're using is literally just a snapshot here and now. And that's all you have. And once that program gets approved, it may, you know, not have that workforce demand in 5-10 years later. So it's sort of like a hard thing to decide based on just what I'm hearing being discussed. But I'm trying to synthesize what I'm hearing from Chancellor, McEwen, President Ginsburg. If you had like a program development framework that posed the opposite of sort of the unduplicative harm, that had like common definitions, what the analysis for duplication looked like, how, and these are examples of what it did for as far as harm to the state, that everybody could utilize when they advanced a program forward, would be a lot perhaps easier to navigate this versus always trying to figure out the opposite, as Ginsburg has suggested, like why it is harmful. But if it hit these marks, then it could be advanced. And that would be the development framework that would open it up for all institutions to be able to advance a program approval. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, yeah.
Be
And so I
able to,
would, go ahead.
no, being able to use the same collective definitions on how to prove that there's market need, at least for this particular snapshot in time. I know that's been discussed at some level. I was just curious if, we've gotten any farther in creating that common sort of framework. I'll stop talking now here.
If you give me 2 seconds, I will pull up our workforce needs analysis. We have developed, and we will annually update. So I do not see Karen King Sheridan on this call, but we have a new staff member as of the beginning of June. Will be 100% devoted to workforce needs. But we have 2 very specific appendices that talk about this. This is the first one that identifies in-demand occupations. And this one identifies programs that lead to those in-demand occupations to really study, analyze, do we have enough programs to meet the occupational need? This is based solely on labor projections, which we know is a limited historical analysis, but nonetheless, it is what we have right now to work with, and we're looking at different ways to expand. This is year 1 of this analysis. So we do have this up on our website as a resource to highlight in-demand occupations and relevant programs that, along with student degree completion, to know if our current programs are actually meeting that need. So worth taking a look at if you have a minute. But Dr. Phillips, to your point, kind of honing in on this when we talk about workforce need, and again, why I'm thrilled we have a new staff member, Karen King Sheridan, to further provide guidance as this work continues, and work closely with your campuses, your advisory councils, with industry partners and the like, the local workforce development boards, of course, Department of Labor, as we think through specific industry needs. So to your point, petroleum engineers before fracking, who knew? And then, right, here we are. So I'm sure we can have very similar conversations with lots of different occupations and lots of different industries. So I want to circle back to President Ginsburg. I hear you, it is a limited analysis because it's based on historical data that is projecting existing occupations. What you don't see in this list is cybersecurity, because cybersecurity isn't necessarily a recognized occupation by Department of Labor. But nonetheless, we know that we need computer scientists. And so that's reference, same thing with drone technology. That's one I always reference. There are just some advanced occupations and industries that current metrics haven't caught up with. Dr. Khan.
So regardless of whoever we are, and whatever our missions are as colleges and universities in Maryland, there's one clear fact: we serve the students, period. That's who we are. And when we serve the students, why don't we wear their shoes, my shoes 30 years ago, about what students look at? And I will tell you, program duplication becomes very reasonable when you think about student choices. When students have choices, it only helps. So that's one. I think the other key piece is, Emily, we have talked about this in the Faculty Advisory Council as to why Maryland is losing students to other colleges out there, other states out there. So I think we have to be mindful also of the fact that our four-year college partners, they do attract students who are not Marylanders. In fact, they do attract students who are international students. And one of them is speaking to you right now, who was an international student, didn't go to London, came to US for just that one reason. And to my last point, to what Chancellor Perman said, and I'm going to kind of spin what he said, and I agree with it, but I'm going to spin it out a little bit, which is this. Dr. Rai and I had we have met quite a few times, and we have chatted with Lieutenant Governor, and Chancellor is absolutely right that the state, all the way from the governor level, is looking at enhancing the business and business and business. That's the number one thing right now. And when you think about business, one of the conversations I had with the Lieutenant Governor Miller, who was an engineer, a STEM colleague, is you cannot bring business to Maryland unless you raise Maryland's global education profile. I'll be very honest with you with that statement. And where California did really, really well when I was an international student, it was their UC system. They created a UC system and then they created a CSU system. They raised their profile and they attracted people. So the Silicon Valley has a different reason of why everyone went out there, not just international students, but even domestic students went there. So I think duplication might help us in raising our profile, not just nationally, but globally. And that will draw business in there. And again, yes, should we, and again, Chancellor said, yes, are there opportunities for us to collaborate, partner with businesses? Of course there are. But, business first thing they do is to say, hey, do I want to move in there? What do colleges look like? And that was the same thing for me. Did I want to go to UK? And yes, UK is a good place, but something attracted here. And it wasn't the weather, well, weather too, but it was the profile of the education institutions. And as a state, I think that's what we have to speak with one unison voice is, what is our ultimate goal for the student who we serve as Maryland?
Helpful. Thank you. Student focused. Love it. Dr. Ward.
Hi, good morning, all. Great conversation, as to be expected. Emily, Dr. Dow, I'm looking across the 4 criteria, and maybe it is for us to figure out. But as I'm looking across them and I'm reading them as perhaps an attorney would, I'm wondering what is the relative weight given to each criterion? Are these and you have to, or it's a combination, you have to, in order to, if you're going to be on the objecting side, you have to demonstrate all 4, one of the 4. Are we clear on the relative weight of each of these criteria? Is one weighted more significantly than the other? So, for example, inconsistency with the institution's mission, or the 4th one, as I'm reading it, unnecessary duplication in violation of the state's equal education opportunity obligations under state law. And I'm wondering, how is the commission thinking about interpreting what the legislature has in mind here relative to each of these 4 criteria?
Sure. And I know, we have one of our AGs on the call, so please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think I have it right. It is an or. So each of these stand independent of one another. And so you can just pick one reason for an objection, or you can pick several reasons for an objection. They stand independent of one another. The only exception to that, and because we are bringing in the workforce analysis, is that workforce does stand alone as, not meeting a statewide need, as indicated in the state plan, is a standalone reason for objection, but it is integrated into the 3rd and 4th option around unreasonable and unnecessary duplication, because meeting a statewide need could be a reason to have a duplicative program, as we have just outlined here. But they are standalone. They are, it's an or, so it could just be one reason, but then we need to have evidence, and we need to have standards for what is harm in particular to the state or student. Does that answer your question?
Yes, as it relates specifically to how it gets read. Now I could see challenges in the implementation of that, and in the practical implementation of that, because while one institution might be able to object on one and make a good case, the proposing institution could make strong arguments on the other three.
Right.
And so how do you reconcile that in practice?
It's a great question. I don't think I have an immediate answer for you on that. Let me put some thought into that. And if it's okay, let me come back to you at a future meeting, because it'll have to be in the guidance document.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I tell you, Dr. Ward, a great question. And that's why this council has been brought together. It's our opportunity to seek input from you and write regulations so that things are clear. I think that's extremely important. Great question. And we want to hear from everyone. Sure, Dr. Dow and our AG, all of us will have an opinion on that, but we want to hear from all of you. How would you address the question that Dr. Ward just raised?
Secretary Rai, you're putting everyone on the spot.
I think it's good, not as a spot, but I think it's important. And I also so appreciate all conversation, especially economic competitiveness. As Chancellor brought it out, Chancellor leads our Life Sciences Advisory Board. We used to be number 4 in the country. We're getting to number 3 now in that area. But employers are looking for talent. They're looking for homegrown talent. Is important. And the program approval is certainly one part of that. As you know, in the last 2 years, Dr. Dow's team has processed, I would say, you can correct Dr. Dow, 1,010 academic proposals. 1,010. 98% have been approved in a record time. So the perception that's out there, when we are talking to businesses, I make that clear too, that our institutions are extremely innovative. They brought 1,000 proposals and 98% were approved in a record time. Because when we are selling estates, I think that kind of information is important. And we also tell them that in Maryland, the state of Maryland, an academic institution is encouraged, not just the new program, how to align existing programs with the workforce needs. So in the state of Maryland, an institution can change 50% of the program without any process, without going to higher education commission. So all those barriers are being lifted. And I think that's important. In the state of Maryland, if you can do cell culture, in any life science person here, so as Chancellor knows that if you can do cell culture, you can get $50,000, $55,000 job immediately, right? So what can we do to make sure that every student who takes biology 101 in the state of Maryland knows how to do cell culture, right? I think those are the things we need to start looking at. New programs, existing programs, and in our conversations with businesses and industries, how do we align existing programs? I was dean at Montgomery College in 2004, and I purchased a PCR machine in 2004. Now we all know what PCR machines are. I brought PCR, I'm a mathematician. I brought PCR machine to a biology faculty meeting. And I said, let's use it for introduction to biology for non-majors. People say it just can't be done, right? But I tell you what, within 6 months at Montgomery College in 2004, students started learning PCR techniques. Now, this DNA photocopying, because of the COVID, this has become very popular. But we have to be ahead in the game. So certainly, legislature has given a wonderful opportunity to us to look at this. How do we move forward with the academic program approval process? But as Dr. Phillips mentioned, how do we transition from academic program approval to academic program development? Right. So I think that is something we need to, that's a proactive approach. We have shortages of teachers, we have shortages of nurses, we have shortages of early childhood care, right? We have shortages in biomanufacturing. We have a lot of life sciences majors. where we have shortages in biomanufacturing. We are seeing cybersecurity and intersection with artificial intelligence. We have opportunities to work in those areas as well. I will keep quiet, but I'm listening and taking everything in. Shastra, thank you.
I absolutely applaud your point, Mr. Secretary, about the 98% of programs that are approved. Regrettably, as we all know, it's the SNITs that we have that get in the paper. The 98% that are approved never do because there's no conflict there. And it's the conflict that kills us in the wider audience. So whatever we can do to reduce the number of conflicts will be all to the good for the state.
I completely agree with that, Chancellor. And I think that's where I think, some of the wonderful examples of collaboration are there. I can see a doctor of social work, great collaboration with UMB and Morgan State University, how they jointly decided to move forward with those proposals. I think, those are the things that are very, very important, how we move forward, and clarity in how we are going to implement House Bill 1244, how the regs are written. That's why this group is here, and we are getting all valuable suggestions. Once in a while, we will have disagreement. Out of 1,000 programs, we may have disagreement on 3 or total 4 programs. And you're right, Chancellor, that does get into the newspaper, and it creates a narrative which is not good for us, not good for the state. But as higher education, the state wants to be economically competitive. It is our opportunity to be part of that success. New academic program, existing academic program, research, innovation. We have tremendous opportunity to provide the state that leg up. And we will do that.
Great. We are coming up to the hour, so we'll unless there are any last comments just for today's meeting, we will come to a conclusion for this discussion. I would ask that you think about this as you continue on over the next few weeks. We will come back to you all, continuing to focus on some standards and expectations for the purposes of drafting regulations and moving ahead with some guidance. So more to come. Any last comments, thoughts? What is harm? When does it happen? And when is it reasonable? When is it reasonable? Back to President Ginsburg. Okay, with that, one final announcement. Our next meeting is October 20th at 10 a.m. I will, if you don't have the calendar invite, I will send it right now so that you all have that on your schedule. And if you think of anything between now and then, please don't hesitate to reach out. Really appreciate the fruitful discussion. We'll take it on and we'll feed you back more at the next meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.